Alex, thanks very much also for the chance to chat to you. Yeah, so okay, I suppose I've got various hats I'm normally wearing. So myself, I'm British. I've been living in Germany now, I think, for well over 25 years. So basically more than half my life. I'm focused very much on questions about how we can improve education. I think probably my biggest focus is trying to bring two things together, which are always a bit difficult, which is innovations and the mainstream. And this is a little bit to do with some of the experience I've had in the past where I've been involved in innovations and I've noticed that that's also a bubble. And I suppose I'm doing that through two things I'm currently doing. On the one side, I'm a manager of a learning platform called Atingi, which I think we'll talk about a bit later. But on the other hand, I'm also adjunct professor at Nova Gorica University in Slovenia, where we have a master program educating people for leadership in open education. And our idea there is mostly it's to do with trying to put all the different bits together that you need when you're thinking about good quality, innovative education that works for today's challenges, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to speak to you for a while within the context of a Horizon 2020 project that the 3CL Foundation has been involved with since last year, which is Dell for All. And like you're part of our community of experts. We're still in this phase, I think, with Dell for All. We've got these ongoing like waves of surveys trying to figure out what's going on. And I think the challenge we have is trying to deconstruct norms or things we assumed were going to happen and haven't happened. So in a way, I want to take you back again to one very simple premise, because I remember when you and I first met, it was at an OER conference here. At the time, there was this very visible OER movement and talk about MOOCs and things like that. And now I see what's happening when I teach, and I know whether people really listening to the broadcast model. And at the end of the day, should we be talking now about, well, you can supplement your learning by watching a YouTube clip or doing, wiki or listen to a podcast? Is any of that still relevant? Are we using the wrong terms now because of the pandemic? And then we'll drill a bit more into this Dell for All scenario.
Sure. Yeah, let's just focus on OER. It's funny, I got into OER for, I think it was in something like 2013 when I was in a discussion with the OECD who was saying, okay, look, one of our points is we really want to see more reform and more innovation in the education sector. And we really believe that that OER could play a huge role here. What they were essentially saying is, look, there's lots of things actually happening around education, but somehow education isn't changing so much. And so, excuse me, maybe OER is one of these points. Let me just take one step back and say what OER means and what it is. So OER is open educational resources. People often see them as very kind of specific kind of things like an OER. Essentially, the easiest way to say it is any kind of artifact you would use in education, but it's now openly licensed. That's really the kind of the key lever. Normally speaking, we would say, okay, well, actually, we also need a second lever, which is it should be open technology as well. The reason why these two things are important is because they say this means that if you get presented, if you look at resources around, you can actually take those resources and adapt them to your own purpose.
Really? So, now it's almost like the remix web, isn't it? Like it is.
Exactly. It's really picked up on, what people were calling edupunk, and it's about remixing. Exactly. So it's interesting. We can see a lot of parallels, of course, with open source programming. It's the same kind of idea, which is like, okay, what about if kind of the foundations can be built actually by individuals in a community, but you have some kind of standards which mean that everyone can use those pieces and then build on top of them. The reason why this is extremely relevant as soon as you start talking about digitalization is that if I were to say kind of what is the kind of the worst form of digital learning, I would always say it's this kind of idea of learning in a box, and the idea that actually a digital learning unit is kind of perfectly polished and finished, and it's going to work for everyone, because that's not how learning works. That's actually also not how you, even if you go back to what is the function of a textbook, that's not how you use textbooks. It's certainly not how you should use them anyway. You don't use that as the one single form of information or the one single kind of source of your learning experience. And this is the same, I think, with that there is a tendency with digital learning that one tends to think quite quickly about this box idea. And we need to make sure that we're breaking open these boxes. And we break them open by firstly having the rights to do that, and that's why you need openly licensing, and then the capability, that's why you need the open tech. Now, why would that be relevant? I can tell you now from my current work on the Atingi learning platform, where we also have a focus, we have a current focus on providing learning opportunities in the African continent. There are many, if we take a topic like digital literacy, let's say, there are already existing materials and existing learning units available. Once you start getting into those, though, you see, wait, the example which is being given is from a completely different context. When I use that now in a context in Rwanda, I'm just going to be kind of switching off the learners at that moment where they see an example which is totally out of this world for them. Normally speaking, you wouldn't be able to make that kind of change if you have it as a closed license and closed tech, but here it would be possible to adapt, and that's one thing we want to be doing. So I think the potential is still there for the OER, but in a way, because I've already had to explain it a little longer, you can already see it's quite a complicated concept in a way, and there's lots of kind of ifs and buts and things related to that, which is probably why often when we're talking about OER, we're talking mostly about potential, and we only have some examples of how it's really being used.
I want to talk a bit about Atingi, and I want to try and in a way crash Atingi into these kind of research projects like we're involved in, right? So we're in like year 2 of Gel for All. And what we found in year 1 is that the education sector was saying, you're talking to us about blockchain and AIs, and we're still struggling with the concept of a VLE. We're still struggling with many rectors at many universities having been complete Philistines and rejected all of this. What we're sensing is that now, I'm not saying it's calming down, that this is the time, however, when there's quite a lot of innovation happening in the background, again, using some of these tools. So if you look at the blockchain, for instance, in Europe, there's the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure Project, which is absolutely huge. And these are, and the EU is using this concept of building blocks of things. So it's almost like going back to Citizen and saying, I'm going to offer you all of these things now, and they are for your own good. What I have at the back of my mind is what you told me at the very beginning, which is you can throw as much technology as you wish. There are mindsets that need to be changed. So I'm kind of curious with that, whether you agree with me on that, but also with Atingi, which is essentially a platform, a virtual platform, being promoted by the German government as a public good, albeit aimed at a specific sector, which I understand is Africa, right? How does all of this thing fit in? At one stage, you've got, money being thrown at, let's look at technology, really technology, and just throw it there, and some good will come out of it. The technologies that you are using, and I don't know how sophisticated they are or not, and at the same time, you also need this blessed content, which might be this digital literacy project. How is all of this going to come together, and is there scope out of this mess that we're in? Okay, so it's a warped question.
We essentially at Atingi, we come at the whole thing from a different perspective, where we say, okay, let's just start with one piece of infrastructure, which is actually a very kind of old-fashioned thing, which is it's a learning management system. That's all it is. It's just a way to provide different learning opportunities which are structured around digital assets normally, for many, many different purposes. At the moment, in terms of tech, we're not really much further than that, to be honest. The interesting thing is we don't see the platform as being the main part of the learning that we're trying to leverage here. Learning is always going to be a social enterprise. So this kind of infrastructure can only play some kind of role in this. The thing is, what we find is maybe 2 points. Because we're focused on Africa and also developing countries, because we're focused on particular countries, we also know that there are many, many people who just their first challenge is a scarcity of learning opportunities. So already just us saying, okay, look, this is a learning platform. Here are some things that we think would be interesting for you. Just learn. This is great for this group. The really interesting thing is, and I think we're a little bit in this phase still at the moment. We have over 200,000 learners on the platform. And now for me, this is when it's going to become interesting, because the more important point is to build communities around this learning. We have, luckily for us, we have 2 opportunities to do that. The first one is, as I mentioned, kind of with the independent learner who's coming to the platform. That's a challenge to try and figure out how we're going to do it there. But we also have another group, and these are all the international development projects sponsored by the German government across the world, who've now discovered digital learning can play a key role in their capacity building. The interesting thing is when they come to us, then they set up their own rooms, they set up their own courses within there. They bring a community with them. So they already actually are using the technology the way we would like to see it being done within like a bigger learning environment. We are actually already talking about some of the big tech questions. So we're talking about blockchain because in connection with using open badges and thinking of new forms of certificates. This is specifically important, or especially important for us for a number of reasons. One of those being that most of our courses are really quite short. So they will have value when you can start trying to see if you can actually stack them together. And secondly, most of our courses are trying to fulfill a particular purpose. And we're very convinced that the learning itself only becomes valuable to the learner when it's recognized. And your standard certificate, which is a PDF with a nice picture on it, is not going to help anyone have it recognized. So this is how we came to open badges, and we've started doing our first iterations with it. We've just done a course in Niger in West Africa on competencies actually in e-learning, in digital learning, and all those people who took part in the course also now have got a digital badge, which many of them promptly then showed on LinkedIn, which I think already shows they see some value in it. Connected to this is the point that, okay, if we start thinking of this extension, that the certificate actually is almost a linking piece to other things like being employed, further learning opportunities, then we have to think about, okay, well, actually, is it actually necessary to go to Atingi at all? And we're at the moment, we're kind of thinking of 2 things with Atingi. We're thinking about what we want to be now and what we want to be in 2025, because we have the perspective on that as well. So in 2025, the way I would see it for sure is the Atingi learning platform is only one element of kind of an Atingi cosmos in a way. But what would this cosmos be, especially because we're involved in international development with partnerships? We don't want to be the new Facebook of learning in a way. We don't want to just say to everyone, use our system, come in and learn only on our system, and then we can provide you things. So we're thinking then beyond this fact of, it's not just the learning opportunities, it's to think about what other things might be of value to the learner. So one point is the certificates, but once you start thinking about, wait, there's going to be certificates, there's going to be learning, there's going to be maybe also job opportunities, then very quickly you get to digital identities. And so we're also working at the moment on a concept of decentralized identities, which could be a kind of a linking piece between these. So I think once you start taking this kind of learner perspective and saying, well, how can I make sure the learner is getting value from all this? Then you can start selecting which pieces of technology might help there. It's a bit of a challenge in a way, because we know at the same time with Atingi, we're working in developing countries, we're working in low to middle income countries where we know connectivity is a challenge, we know it's expensive, but we also know two things about many of the areas we're involved in. Number one, the change is massively rapid. So we know that what we're looking at a situation today will be different in 1 or 2 years' time. And secondly, we're looking at systems where in many areas we would be talking about, there's very little legacy. So in fact, this kind of mainstream we talked about before is not such a blocker as it might be in some of our other countries.
That's what we're finding with Dell for All, that there are these bigger questions which are seeping in, and we're trying to find a way of getting everybody around the same table. The technologically oriented people, and just say, just because you build it, it doesn't mean that they will come. And on the other side, you have people in their ivory towers of education, and that ivory tower has been shattered at least for the last 12 months, 13 months. And I think this is a really interesting time that we have now. And then the last thing which I really love is what you were talking about is, I think this whole of communities of learning, communities of practice. Somebody who's studied teachers networks, okay? I mean, but in terms of social networks, and we know how badly served we are with the current social networks, social platforms we have. And I'm starting to hear now, I was on the World Bank project yesterday, we're talking about public social networks for the public good. It's almost like we're going back to Robert McChesney and talking about media for the public good. So it's almost like we're going back to the future. And I think we're at a really interesting time. I think with Atingi, I think it's good that you take the brave decision of saying we're going to use Moodle, we're going to use open source. But then it's, at the end of the day, it's going to be like, I hear what you say about standards, and let's make sure that these things talk to each other. Ultimately, I think we really are going to have to go back and think in terms of value, the context that we're in, and it's going to be messy. For the time being, it's going to be messy. Dominic, thank you.